Okay.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome everybody. We're here today for our webinar. Today's webinar is on compliance in a working from home environment. So today's webinar is brought to you by Safetrac. I'm Chris Demopoulos. I'm the marketing manager here at Safetrac. For 20 years, Safetrac has become a leader in online business training, specializing in compliance. This webinar is going to be slightly different. We're looking to have a highly engaged webinar where we actually encourage you, the participants out there watching, to feed in your questions, to actually ask us what you've been thinking about and your queries around the compliance topic in this new work from home environment. There's a Q&A tool in your webinar menu, so I encourage you to use that and post any questions that you have on your mind, and our expert presenters will look to answer those throughout our presentation today. We've included some of your questions from the registration process as well, so that have already been fed into our presentation. So on to our presenters. Today's presenters are our Chief Executive Officer, Deborah Coram. Hello, Deb. And our Head of Content and Client Services, Helen Jamieson. Hello, Helen.
Hi, everyone.
So I might hand over straight to you, Deb, to go through today's topics.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in these oh so strange and interesting times. We have a large amount of clients that we support for their compliance training requirements, and we have quickly adjusted our compliance training and courses to adjust for this new normal or part-time or temporary change in work environment that we have. We have been inundated with requests and questions from clients wanting us to help them out through this period of time. So we put this webinar together in order to flesh out some of the main issues around compliance in the working from home environment, and we hope that's going to be useful for you. I think the short answer to so many people's questions is yes, whether your staff are working from home or they're working from the office, you remain vicariously liable for them and for their compliance with the laws that apply to your workplace and to the type of work that you do. Today, of course, we don't have time to go through every type of compliance challenge and compliance requirement that there is. So we are going to hit on the main issues that we see as being relevant as a change as people move to a work from home environment. We are going to cover over work health and safety, bullying and harassment, cybersecurity, confidentiality, and privacy. We have, as Chris said, we've got some questions through this registration process that we've actually used to try and formulate how we address these topics and what we cover. There is quite a lot of breadth and depth to them, and we obviously only have time for a summary approach. So this is not meant to be a comprehensive approach or legal advice of any stage. It's really advisory. We'll try and address any other questions you've got throughout here on the course of each of these pages as we go through. And if you don't get a chance to have your question answered through the seminar, we will address it at the end if we've got time. So the first thing that we're going to move into looking at is work health and safety. So obviously we've moved from an office environment to asking most of our staff to work from home. So yes, you need to make sure, as far as reasonably practicable, that you do ensure that your staff are adhering to health and safety law and that your staff are looked after from a health and safety perspective. We need to make sure that there are not risks that we are putting our staff in front of by asking them to work from home, and that their workplace, which is now their home, is reasonably free, as far as reasonably practicable, from risks to their safety. So the sort of things that we are encouraging workplaces to address are ensuring that the worker's home complies with general work health and safety requirements. And that may be things like making sure they've got smoke detectors fitted, making sure that their desks are ergonomically set up so that they're working in a way that's not going to create issues with their posture. We want to make sure that they have completed a risk assessment that allows us to see whether or not they are compliant with some of these things and if there are any issues that they're suffering. And we need to make sure that we have a policy that addresses that staff member working from home. We need to make sure that they've been given clear instructions about how to work from home safely. We need to make sure that we have, as far as reasonably practicable, had some sort of assessment of their workplace and environment to make sure that it meets with our legislative requirements. And we need to make sure that any health and safety issues that a staff member is experiencing can be reported in a clear and transparent manner, and that the employee knows how to do that. Now, one of the big things that we're seeing being addressed through this crisis is mental health. And yes, you are responsible for ensuring, as far as reasonably practicable, that your staff are in good mental health and that your workplace is not impinging on that worker's mental health. These, of course, are very interesting times, and there are many pressures on people's mental health, such as partners losing income, staff being stood down, staff working reduced hours, staff trying to do their job with little ones and children trying to jump onto online Zoom conferences. And I'm sure if we're lucky throughout this session, my door will no doubt open from one of my children requiring something of me. There is a big sign on the outside that says do not disturb, but despite the fact they can read, it doesn't seem to stop them a lot of the time. So I'm sure we're all dealing with things like that, and these can put pressures which can impact our mental health alongside just pure social isolation and having to work in such a different manner. Even people getting comfortable sitting and talking in a conference with a video on them is so bizarre and strange. And yes, the more you do it, the more comfortable you become with it, especially if you manage to get out of your pajamas and dress as though you're going to work. So there are certain ways that we can encourage our staff to work that can help them approach working from home in a really healthy manner. We need to make sure that they're going out and getting some exercise, that they're not on their computer from 8 till 8, that they are taking breaks, that they are complying with a regime that we think would help encourage their mental health. We need to make sure that we're regularly checking in with our staff, that we're, whether it be through phone, video, or some other means, not just email and not just Slack, so that there is some community involvement and some social involvement with our staff. We need to create as many opportunities as possible for communication. And we need to make sure that staff are available and happy to receive calls and contacts and able to deal with questions, concerns, or anything, so that staff feel they're working in an environment where if they're having trouble, that they can work flexibly to try and accommodate the difficult situations that we're all being faced with in working in this environment. I think at that point, that's probably enough of my voice. I'd like to pass over to my wonderful head of content, Helen Jamison, who, if any of our clients are probably very familiar with Helen. She does a wonderful job of ensuring that our content is always up to scratch and up to speed. So, Helen, I'm sure I've missed a few things you want to address, so I will pass over to you.
Okay, thanks for that, Deb. Hi, everybody. You've covered pretty much everything off, Deb, but there is a couple of things that come to mind from my perspective. You mentioned ergonomics in the home, and a lot of, when I've been speaking to clients, a lot of clients have said to me that people don't have an office setup because they've never had to work in an working from home office environment before. So they may not have that ergonomic chair, they may not have the second monitor set up that they usually have in an office environment, and they may not have, you know, a standing desk that they're used to at work. Now, if it's possible in your organisation, one thing that we potentially would recommend is if you can allow your staff members to go back into the actual office and pick up some of those ergonomic things that they're used to, then that's a really good idea, so that they can bring them home. When everything gets back to normal, obviously they'll take them back in. But if they don't have those things that they're used to now, it can make them just feel really more supported in the home office environment if they can go and pick those things up. Obviously, it needs to be done in a controlled way. You can't have everybody descending into the office at the same time. But that has certainly helped a few few clients that I've spoken to. Another point that I did want to make is that your obligations and liability for workers' compensation claims apply when people are working remotely too. So if an employee does suffer an injury in the course of their work while at home, it is your responsibility to ensure they're covered by your workers' compensation insurance. So that's just another thing that you need to be aware of. But other than that, I think that's about us for work health and safety, Chris.
That's great. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Deb. We'll move on to our next topic, which is bullying and harassment. So we had a question from our audience in our registration period, which was, can bullying and harassment occur in a remote working environment? So with this one, Helen, I might get you to kick this one off, please.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. So to begin with, let's just confirm the definitions of what bullying and harassment are. Bullying is repeated behaviour that is unreasonable and creates a risk to the health and safety of the individual. Harassment is similar to bullying, but it can be a one-off incident. And it's a common misconception that bullying and harassment behaviour can't happen when people are working remotely because it has to happen in person. However, that's not necessarily the case. Bullying behaviour does not need to be conducted in person, and people can be bullied and harassed by their colleagues or their managers when working from home. It may actually increase in these times of uncertainty. So there's a real danger that the new conditions and increased self-isolation can create a climate where bullying behaviours are hard to pick up and where effective communication deteriorates because some team members are out of sight and out of mind and people forget about any of the issues they may have. Technology can also facilitate cyberbullying, and cyberbullying can make the social isolation of working from home worse, and the longer it continues, the more stressed an employee can become, and it can impact obviously on their emotional and physical well-being. So there are several sort of issues that come to mind when working from home. The first one is that a lot of people are used to dealing with people face-to-face and in the office, and when you're using things like chat or Slack or emails, these written forms of communication can be misconstrued, and people could take offence to things that you put in a written communication that they wouldn't normally take offence to if they were talking to the person in person. So you need to be very aware of what you send in emails, and it's always better if you can, especially if you're having a difficult conversation with someone, to have that difficult conversation face-to-face via a video call or via a phone call. You've also got the isolation and loneliness that a lot of us are feeling at the moment, and that can actually impinge on a person's ability to think rationally, and they have heightened emotions, which they can then deflect onto others without meaning to, which can put those anxieties onto other people. People are also feeling frustrated and with the sheer scope of the new working from home environments, and the fact that some of them feel they don't have firm work boundaries anymore and can be contacted at any point in the day, night, morning, and things like that. So again, this puts added pressure on the worker, which can be mistaken for bullying practices. From a management point of view, one of the major issues with remote bullying is that is micromanagement. So if you're seen to be checking in on one of your staff members more than another one, this can be seen as harassment or bullying, and especially if it's beyond reasonable employee monitoring and what is the norm for others. So you need to make sure that you communicate any performance with a staff member directly to ensure they're not feeling singled out. Also, from a management perspective, you have to have a process in place of how you're going to manage any complaints that come your way regarding bullying and harassment. You should handle any complaints that do come your way immediately, as there's obviously the danger that people feel they're not being taken seriously when they're not in the office environment. So that's probably about it for me, Deb. I might throw back to you on this one to discuss control measures that organisations can take to minimise the risk of workplace bullying.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. And I mean, you've started to address some of those, so I'd probably just add into that, that we need to make sure that a standard is set in terms of workplace behaviour from a document that or something that applies a consistent standard to what's acceptable throughout a workplace. So we usually recommend staff go through a code of conduct or a bullying and harassment course. It's worthwhile updating that to ensure it accommodates this new work from home environment, so it can provide examples and conduct for how people are expected to engage in this new medium, to make sure that everybody's trained and on the board, and that there's a consistent standard of acceptability that's placed across the organisation. We need to ensure that there is a clear manner in which bullying can be reported and what is the response procedure. It could be that people would usually maybe do it in person by reporting to somebody in the workplace. That methodology may have gone away in this new normal, so we need to make sure that there is an easy way for those things to be reported and handled in an online environment, and again, that our staff understand what that process is. We need to make sure that people are receiving training on what those processes, procedures, conduct is, and hopefully we have updated, if we needed to, our policy in relation to bullying and harassment, and we need to make sure that all of our staff have signed off on that policy and that they agree to abide by it. This is a really good time to be sending through to our staff a revised version of our policies which address these type of things from a work from home environment, and we make sure that they sign off on those. And if you, for those of you attending today who are Safetrac clients, we of course can attach those policies to an existing course, and we can simply create a sign-off question at the end of the course that says, I have read, understood and agree to comply with the policy. And that helps ensure and refresh staff's memory as to what's okay, and especially what's okay in this online environment. I think that one of the things that I would like to stress is the role of leaders and managers during this period of time. It is utterly essential that we go alongside our compliance norm of the tone of the top sets the mood in the middle, which creates the buzz at the bottom. And we see with this sort of environment that there's never been a better time for leaders to lead. And the way in which leaders communicate, the way in which they manage staff is going to set the tone for how middle managers are going to treat our staff, and in turn create the way that other people can communicate with others. So ensuring that communications are professional and clear, that we make sure that we're even more efficient at handling complaints, that we personally get involved in doing that and making sure we understand what the issues are, and if something needs to be adjusted to our work processes to make sure that that doesn't occur again over the organisation, that these are addressed. We need to be really careful in the tone in our emails at the moment, because people are ultra sensitive and can read tone into emails that doesn't exist. Even the use of capital letters or exclamation marks can really create anxiety. So making sure our leaders and managers are communicating in a polite way, and making sure, double checking your emails and making all your communications, and making sure that's not sounding cross, angry, or somehow different from one staff member to another. And I think we really need to make sure that we are curious, we're empathetic, and we're caring towards our staff and the family dynamics that they're currently working within, and that we really have some empathy and applicability to how we need to maybe modify people's hours, how they can work, given what they have to take care of. Personally, I have 2 staff members who are managing autistic children in a home workplace and having to do their work day as well. So I'm sure that we're a reason, we have a staff of 30. I'm sure the larger the staff, you could amplify that over. And this is an ongoing and repeated issue that people are going to be having. So having empathy to that, allowing people to work different work hours to what they may normally be used to, and just to having some care and understanding for the personal situations that people is absolutely vital of our leaders at this point in time.
That's
Chris, I
fine.
think that's probably covers off the bullying and harassment angle. I think it'd be good to
Yeah, I
move
think
through
so.
to our next topic.
Definitely. I think we had a lot of good information there. Thank you, ladies. So the next topic that we have is our cybersecurity topic. So there's a couple of questions actually that came through around this. So what are the new risks we need to be aware of as an organization? And what should we be teaching our staff while they work remotely? So Deb, might throw this one over to you.
Yeah, well, obviously this is a new norm and we are going to be exposing our staff to working in all different ways. Some workplaces, people will already have their own computers and have simply brought their computers home and be working on those work computers. Other people are going to be asking their staff to work from home computers. So that's going to bring in a whole lot of new issues that we need to be aware of. The things that we're seeing as the most prevalent cybersecurity issues that need to be monitored are phishing scams. Phishing scams and whaling scams. So people receiving emails of a fraudulent nature that creates the staff member to click on something that may, by clicking on, download a virus or expose the network to something out of risk. Whaling is when a imposter impersonates a senior leader of an organisation and asks for things to be done, such as monies to be transferred. We're finding these being very successful in this period of time where we can't walk down the office and talk to them about that transfer. So it's important that our staff understand these risks, they understand how to handle them, and that, that they're properly trained in the way that we want them to be managed. We need to make sure that they can recognise these types of emails for what they are, and that we've got processes and procedures in place to ensure that they're not actually going to create damage to the organisation. For instance, a person receiving a money transfer request, we can easily make sure that money transfer requests have to be verified in person via a phone call or a video conference, and that the authorization is approved by two people, that we're checking who the requester is, we're checking the email address, the actual address, not just the nominee name in a sent file. We need to make sure that our staff are adopting secure passwords, not just for home computers, but also for their home wireless networks. Home wireless networks is a considerable threat to organisations in that they allow our data to be transferred, and the password will help encrypt and protect data being transferred. So we need to make sure that they are set with very strong passwords. Many homes are not set with strong passwords, so ensuring our organisation has policies about how to do that and they are checked. We need to use things like paraphrases rather than home, dates of birth and things like that that might have been acceptable when we weren't transferring large amounts of work data. We have seen a great rise in scams in relation to COVID-19 to help spread disinformation amongst people and to utilise people's curiosity and concern to get them to click on information about COVID-19, which is really shielding something in relation to something damaging that could create network vulnerabilities and vulnerabilities in relation to your workplace data. So we're making sure that we need to make sure that staff exercise critical thinking and vigilance in relation to the emails they're clicking, the internet sites that they're going on. We need to make sure that they're vigilant in relation to providing personal details, password, bank details, especially when we've got an email with some sort of sense of urgency that's associated with that. We need to make sure that we're confirming requesters' identities, that we don't act immediately, that there are processes to delay immediate action, and that we make sure we train our staff into how to utilise and verify trusted information sources. In terms of, teaching staff, it's never been a better time to train our staff in a variety of items. I think, Helen, I'd like to pass over to you
Mm-hmm.
to address what it is that we should actually be teaching our staff as we work from home.
Yeah, thanks for that, Deb. Yeah, it's certainly a very interesting environment for a lot of people at the moment, and a lot of people who haven't worked from home before are not all together sure of how they can make sure the networks and things are secure. If possible, if your organisation can, one of the major things is to implement a multi-factor authentication. A lot of companies are doing that at the moment. It's whereby what happens is, rather than just having a username and password, you might also have to put in a code. It sends you something to your mobile phone, and then you put that PIN in as well. It's one of the most effective controls you can have for unauthorized access to your computers and online services, because it makes it just that much harder for a hacker to steal your proof of identity. They just don't have the username or password, they need that PIN as well. So if it's possible to do that, then obviously the multi-factor authentication is a good security tool for people to use. One of the big things is to ensure your staff are updating the software on their home computer. I know I'll put my hand up for one. When it comes up is, do you want to install the latest updates? I always say later, because I can't be bothered doing it now. But the thing is that a lot of those software updates are developed to address security issues, and they include new security features that your staff shouldn't use. So if you can train your staff to not do that later, but do install those software updates, that's a good thing to do. Or you can also train your staff and require them to use a virtual private network, so a VPN, to connect to the portable devices to the organisation's internal network. VPNs secure your web browsing and remote network access and prevent man-in-the-middle attacks from a remote location, which means people pretending to be the other person that you're communicating with. If you do have the VPNs, you should ensure that all of your staff know obviously how to use them, but they also have the relevant policies and procedures on their use that they've been trained on and understand. You should also, again, from a physical security perspective, ensure that your staff don't leave their computers unattended and they lock their computer screens when they're at home and not in use. Obviously, everybody really does that in the office. However, here, when you're in your home, it's very easy to go and make yourself a cup of tea or whatever and not lock things down. But you should do that because it limits the opportunity for anybody else to access the device. Also, home computers are generally, if you haven't been able to bring home your computer from work, home computers are unlikely to have the security with antivirus as your office computers. So make sure your IT department relays information to all your staff on which antivirus software programs they should be using and how to implement them and upload them if they haven't got it. Also, your employees should also be trained on information about, when people have got a home computer with a lot of other family members accessing it. Make sure they all have separate profiles and they log in with different usernames and passphrases. This prevents the other members of the household unintentionally either deleting information that's important or introducing malicious software to the device. So I think I've covered pretty much everything I wanted to, Chris. So yeah, if Deb doesn't have anything more, I'll hand back.
No, I think that's great. I think you've both covered a lot in that area. So we'll move on to the next topic, which is around confidentiality. So again, a couple of good question here from our registrations. One, what are some of the considerations with work activities where confidentiality may be breached in the home? So I think this question might be good, Deb, if you kick this one off for us.
Yeah, look, there's an interesting interplay between cybersecurity, confidentiality and privacy. And it's important that we address them and recognise them individually for what they are. but understand that there is a correlation between each of those. When we are asking our staff to work from home, they're obviously not working in the work bubble, which is protected from a confidential point of view. We're actually asking staff to work at home where they may be with their spouse, who may well work at a competitor organisation, and also with children who have very flappy ears, and an interesting conversation at mum and dad's phone call could easily be told on a chat to school friends. And before you know it, we have some information going out about a company that was never intended to go out. So it's just at home, I'm just with my partner and my kids, does not mean that it's a safe environment and that confidential information is automatically going to be protected. We need to make sure that both our software and our phone calls and our documents, whether they're online or they're printed, are protected, and making sure that if they contain confidential information, they are not left lying around or they're destroyed in a way that ensures that the confidentiality of that information is maintained. We need to ensure that our workplace policy is updated to ensure that our staff understand what they need to be doing to protect confidential information as they work from the home. And we need to make sure that the worker's home environment for working is consistent with the protection of information that our workplace would be. I know I, for one, don't have a secure document bin at home to destroy company documents when I'm finished with them. In fact, I don't even own a shredder. What to do in this environment? I mean, I've actually stopped printing documents is my quick turnaround for it. I don't print anything right now, but they're the sort of things that we need to be thinking about, that if there are written materials, how are they going to be destroyed or how are they going to be stored securely? And really, in order for our organisation to get its head around what are these risks, we should be asking our staff to undertake a risk assessment, and that risk assessment should be a series of questions for our staff so that we can try and understand the work environment that they're currently within. We need to know who has access to the employee's computer. We need to make sure that the home is relatively secure so that any confidential information in that home is protected. We need to make sure that our cybersecurity items have been addressed, such as encryption, use of passwords, and how data is being transferred between the home and the office. We need to make sure that our privacy rules, and we'll address privacy as a separate item, such as the secure storage and destruction of data, is adequately addressed for documents in the home. And we need to make sure that adequate measures are put in place for accidental loss, destruction, or damage of data. So really, to do that, we need to start looking at best practices. So after completing a risk assessment in some sort of a survey form, we can start to understand what policies and procedures our organisation needs to be implementing to ensure that any risks or issues are addressed through those policies and procedures, and to ensure that our confidential information of the company is protected. And in terms of those sort of best practices, there's a number of sort of things that we can ask and recommend our staff follow. They would include requiring staff to have a separate room that they can work in, if possible. I've heard of people working in closets. And not that I can recommend that that's a great place to go to work. If a secure phone call or confidential phone call needs to be held, it needs to be held in a place that's not going to be overheard by other people. We're making sure that we've acquired a filing cabinet that can be locked, where we can put either computers or documents away for secure storage when they're not being utilised. We can ensure that our staff re-sign a non-disclosure agreement. And that can be an amendment to an existing agreement that ensures it extends to data that may be being brought into the home. We need to make sure that a laptop computer has all the necessary protections loaded onto it. So we should be ensuring that IT is calling into staff who may be using home computers and ensure they are updated appropriately. We need to make sure that staff, if they are loading software onto the computer and then accessing company information, that what they're downloading on that computer is safe and secure. So having a line of sight to IT that they can check things and make things as safe before that they can download is a good way to go. Ensuring that all passwords have a certain level of security associated with them. We need to make sure that confidential phone calls are not on loudspeaker, which might be good if we want to type and put our phones on loudspeaker, but it also exposes that information to a much wider audience of ears listening to that information. And ideally, we're in a closed room, or if not no closed room, somewhere outside in a secure place. I think that's probably me for confidentiality. And as I said, it really does align very tightly with some privacy issues. And given I've yabbered on enough about confidentiality, I will hand over to Helen to have a look at privacy in the home.
No worries, I'll bring that one up now. So onto privacy. Hels, we have two questions here from our audience. What are the concerns with privacy when we're working in isolation? And how do I encourage remote working staff to protect private information?
Thanks, Chris. Good questions. So basically, let me start with the first one. The privacy concerns when you're working from home are exactly the same as in the office. However, they're heightened when people aren't working in a secure environment. So working remotely doesn't change how the Australian privacy principles apply to you or your business. The same concerns on collection, use, disclosure, correction, storage, destruction of personal information still apply. So you should consider in your business whether any changes to the working arrangements will impact on how your business handles personal information. And you should assess any potential privacy risks and put in place appropriate mitigation strategies on them. One of the strategies that people could use is a privacy impact assessment, or a PIA. And this evaluates and mitigates risks. It's a great framework to evaluate and mitigate risks to personal information. It can help basically mitigate privacy risks associated with the remote working arrangements that have been implemented. So you can find more information about that from the OAIC website. There are other key factors that you should consider. Firstly, are your staff trained appropriately? Do they have documented policies and procedures? And also the management oversight to ensure they're aware of their obligations regarding personal information when working remotely. So have they been trained on the physical security of handling personal information when at home? As mentioned in our cybersecurity topic, another thing is, are all of your information communication technology secure and to prevent the risks of external attacks and the potential leak of personal information to hackers. Remote working arrangements may also give rise to the trusted insider risk, which means basically that staff members need to be subject to the same level of access to personal information that they would have when they were in the standard office environment. So only people who need access to personal information should have access to that personal information. And you also need to make sure that you have methods available to identify inappropriate access of files or databases that contain personal information. Physical security is also important, and Deb spoke a bit about this in the confidential information topic. We need to ensure unauthorized disclosure of personal information is not heard or seen by other members of the household. And obviously, it's very dependent on the business that you're in, how much personal information and what kind of sensitive information you may have on people. So personal information should never ever be sent to your own personal email address for printing or something like that. And any documentation that is printed should be stored securely, as Deb said, in a secure filing cabinet, or shredded or disposed of in a secure manner. Lastly, you should ensure that if any data is breached, your staff are aware of your data breach response plan and can access it from home. Furthermore, the data breach response team should have made changes to that plan to allow for these new working arrangements and make sure that they communicate those changes to all of the staff members as to how to deal with a breach should it occur. I think that's about all I have on the topic. Deb, did you want to add some more?
Deb,
You're on mute.
you unmute, Deb.
Sorry. I think what I was going to say is if we do run a PIA, it allows us to understand what is the environment that we're working with here. And if we are having staff accessing information on personal computers, we need to be looking at how are we going to deal with this when we return to work and when people are no longer working in this environment. We're going to potentially need to make sure that information is scrubbed from devices and deleted securely so that information trails and privacy information may not be left behind on personal PCs and in home environments. So ensuring that we're sort of thinking about potential risks of the way that people are working is potentially maybe changing what we've said in our standard privacy policy. And if it is, what we're going to do about that to address that. It could even mean we should be looking at our privacy policies and adjusting them slightly because it might be saying that nobody's working from a home computer, whereas in fact now they are. So we need to be looking at privacy holistically and how this work from home environment is potentially changing what we've said and how we are going to protect information. And even if it is changing it, what we're going to be doing about it as an organisation, both from a policy perspective and then as a return from work scenario, when we do go back to the workplace, what are we going to do with the information that may have been left behind? So there's some really quite large issues there that, as I say, have some interplay between confidentiality and security of information obviously is critical to this, and the security issues do address a lot of things in relation to privacy. So I think that that's probably it in terms of what we wanted to cover today.
Yeah,
I'm not sure, Chris, do we have any additional questions that from our panelists that you would like to have answered?
No, we haven't had any additional ones. I think one of the key things as well is, which you guys have covered a lot in terms of the content and the compliance aspect of it. Obviously, the training element is key to making sure that everyone is aware of all these changes and all this this content. So we do have some courses that would be good, Deb, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, sure, Chris. In terms of our standard courseware, yes, they address a lot of these issues. We've released a new branch of courses which specifically address a whole lot of the stuff that we've addressed in this topic. The working from home compliance course is aimed at a manager level to apprise them of the types of issues that we need to be aware of, such as the ones discussed today. And then the working from home code of conduct is really aimed at employees to ensure that they understand these issues and what they need to be doing in order to be compliant and to ensure that they're not putting our company's information at risk and are acting appropriately in the work from home environment. We also have a work from home checklist that allows us to do this sort of audits and see that people are working from home safely. Before I move on from that, there was one question that I personally received before this seminar that I would like to address. And that was a question in relation to domestic violence and whether domestic violence and people working from home, what is an organisation's responsibility in relation to that if they're being asked to work from home. We actually have since, we're starting to see this as a recurring and increasing theme that's incredibly important that we need to not forget about as organisations. So the response that Safe Work would go forward with is that a workplace is required to do whatever is reasonably practicable to ensure a worker is safe. So if we are aware of a staff member that may be in a situation where they are exposed to domestic violence, us asking that person to work from home is potentially asking them to work from home in an unsafe environment. So is there some liability there from an organisational perspective? Yes, there is. So what do we do and how do we manage against this? We need to make sure that our staff have a means of communicating with us and reporting if there is any risks to their safety in a work from home environment. And we need to potentially ensure that we have a means of allowing them to work from the workplace if their home is an unsafe place to work. And if their home is an unsafe place to work, we need to contemplate whether that's the right person that should be working from home and whether that role should, how we can continue that role or if it should be continued in these times. Obviously, we don't want to take work away from somebody exposed to domestic violence, so it's a very, very delicate issue. We are recommending that all staff are trained in recognising signs of domestic abuse and violence, that we ensure our company's policies and procedures train staff in ways as to not to advocate and encourage negativity and domestic violence. We need to make sure that our staff are trained in what our workplace's policies are if we do know somebody who is suffering from this and how they can recommend and advise somebody if they are in that situation. And of course, we need to be a workplace with leaders who are empathetic and understanding and are people that our staff feel that they can come to and report issues to, and that we can do everything we can to protect people in these environments. So that's a horrible theme to end on, and I don't want to, but it is vitally important that it's one that we are cognizant of and aware of, and again, that we're training our staff in relation to. So I hate to come back to training, but in these times, it's really important that we're ensuring our staff are receiving consistent messaging, that they are receiving the same information, and that they're not getting information from 15 different sources. Consistency of information and training has never been more important. These courses will certainly help summarise these issues for you and allow you to ensure a consistent approach is applied to your staff. And I will say that, Chris, if you move to the next slide, for people who have attended this session today, we are offering a 25% discount on any of our working from home courses. For those who've registered and attended this webinar. All they need to do is when they are receiving a quote or they're putting in an inquiry, they just need to say WFH webinar in the subject line or mention it to account manager or salespeople, and that discount will be applied for any purchase up to the 31st of May this year. I will also say that even though this is important that we're looking at it, we are hopeful that we will be returning to work and to the workplace in the not too distant future. We've done an amazing job as Australians of staying at home and helping get on top of this virus. And I'm hopeful that our next lot of courses will be returning to work courses and not working from home courses, as I see that being realistic probably within the next 6 weeks. So I think all of us will be looking forward to looking at other people than just our own families. Again, lovely though our families are. So I think that's, if there's no further questions, Chris, we can...
No, I think that's it. We've had some great feedback from our audience, so thank you for that. Thank you to both Helen and Deborah for your information today, for your attendance, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Fantastic.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Yeah, bye.